Okay, hi everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for coming along, and we hope you all had no problems logging in and everything. My name's Dave Payne. I'm sort of facilitating the webinar today. I'm just going to introduce our speaker. So our speaker today is Rebecca Bennyworth, MBE. She's the chair of our tax faculty, and has done lectures in the past about personal finance and budgeting for us. She really is an expert on this subject, so I'm just going to hand over to her now. Hopefully you'll get a lot of use and a lot of value out of what she has to say today. So Rebecca?
Well, a brief introduction that most of you missed, but let's just tell you that what we've done at ICAW is we've developed this suite of webinars to give you some support in managing your money, whether you're still at school or out at work or attending university. And I understand some of the people listening are actually university students, so I hope this is going to help you a little bit. Okay, so let's dig in and see what I've got for you. What is budgeting? Well, it's used in a number of contexts, but for the purpose of what we're doing today, it's essentially looking at either making sure you've got enough money to do what it is that you want to do. So let's say maybe you were going out to the pictures, and let's say in years gone by you would have asked your parents for some money. Then what you've got to think about is not only actually getting into the cinema, but you might want something to eat, and don't forget to budget for the bus home, otherwise you'll come out and find you've got no money and you're ringing Dad saying, oh dear, I forgot. So that's one way of budgeting. For others it means you've got a fixed amount of funds and you actually start to plan what you can do with that money. So let's have a look at what that means for you. Everyone needs to budget. Those of you who are at university are on a fixed income, but just to head in the direction of national budgets, even the government has to budget. In fact, that's where the term comes from that we have in the spring. Nobody's got an infinite supply of money, and government in particular has a very limited supply, and that is what it can get out of taxpayers. Wealthy people do need to budget, but they just have bigger numbers and probably spend a bit more on luxuries, but they still need to start by budgeting. So let's think of a scenario where you might, at this stage in your life, have to do some budgeting. One situation might be that you have a big birthday coming up and Mum and Dad say, okay, we'll allocate you some money and you can decide what sort of party you'd like, and you start running through the possibilities. Some of the possibilities might mean that lots of people come. Some might mean it's a little bit more intimate, 2 or 3 friends come along. So you start thinking about what types of things you'd like to do and how that might work out practically. Then you need to start thinking about, okay, how many people can I include given what I'm choosing to do, after doing a bit of a fact find. So I've looked at a couple of examples of things that you might want to do. So how about a trip to a spa for a very nice birthday treat? So what you might do is establish that a day spa is let's say £60–65. That probably includes lunch, but then maybe you want to get a manicure, maybe you want to have a massage. How many people do you want to take along? It'd be quite an intimate thing, but obviously it's quite an expensive event, so maybe you can take 2 or 3 friends along, and then once you've actually worked out the cost of the spa, are you going to have to pay to get there? Are you going to have to take a taxi? Is there someone who can give you a lift? Is it a long way away? Do you need to get an overnight stay? So all of those elements will actually build into a budget and then feed back into the sort of money that Mum and Dad have authorised for your do. Alternatively, you might prefer to go paintballing. Now this is quite a good example because what you'll see if you do a bit of research on the web is a quoted figure per person for the cost of a paintballing afternoon. So you probably base your calculations on that, divide by the number of people you want to take, establish you can do it. That'll give you a lift, so you're not going to have to pay for any transport. But when you get there, you get a nasty shock, because having actually paid your upfront fee, you have to buy your paintballs. You hadn't budgeted for that, your friends haven't brought any money, so you only get a small allocation of paintballs that come in with the money, let's say 4 or 5 each, and your afternoon isn't half as much fun as it could have been with a bit more planning and a little bit more fact-finding. And maybe you didn't budget anything for refreshments, so you can't have a cup of coffee or a soft drink or something to eat after you've been rushing around in the woods firing your 1 or 2 paintballs. So those two just give you an idea of why budgeting is important, but also what can go wrong. So essentially, setting a budget is not only about actually finding out what you can do, finding out how much things cost. It also involves obviously making decisions about which way to go, sitting back and having a look at it, having a think, is there something I've forgotten? Thinking about that paintballing and thinking about, okay, I've not been before, I wasn't expected to know that there weren't any paintballs. So afterwards what you'll do is you'll compare what you thought with what actually turned out. So really a key part of budgeting. It would seem to most people that the budget's over. You've decided what you're going to spend and that's it. But when we're talking about budgeting in your daily life and actually managing to live off a fixed income, probably more important than the first stab at the budget is sitting down and finding out what you got right, what you got wrong and why, so that the next time you prepare a budget, maybe for the next year or the next 6 months, you can actually do a better budget because you've found out the things that you missed and therefore your budget is a bit more robust. So those are the basic elements of budgeting. So let's have a little bit of a think about preparing a budget as a student. Now, it's worth thinking about whether you are already at university or whether you're going to university in a year or two's time. And in fact, most of the steps will be exactly the same if you aren't going to go to university and you're thinking about maybe getting your first home, getting your first flat, going independent. Can you afford the rent, for example, on the salary that you've got? As a student, your income will normally be your student loan, so government student loan, and maybe a loan from your parents as well. Maybe mum and dad very kindly are actually giving you some money that's going to help you out, and you might actually think about getting a job. We'll have a little look at that later, but can you get a bit of extra income in from a job? So you can think about what you've got incoming. And then the first thing you budget is essential spending. Generally people say if you're warm, dry and you're fed, then you'll be okay. So let's have a look at that in the context of a young person at university. Well, you're going to need somewhere to sleep. So your rent, whether it is for a flat or whether it's for University Hall of Residence, must come first. Then you need to check whether light and heat are included. Normally in a university hall, what you pay includes your heating and electricity, gas and water and whatever else. But if you're out in a flat in student accommodation, very often your bills will be in addition to your rent. So although the rent looks cheaper, it can be quite a lot more expensive when you take into account these other bills. So what you need to do in trying to budget for that is find your facts out, what's included in the rent, and then start to try and think about how to budget for the other costs. I'll talk a little bit more about how you might find out about that later. Food, you need to be fed, so you will need to include an amount for food, and again in a minute we'll have a little bit of a think about how you might arrive at those amounts. Transport is key. Let's think about university students. Are you going to have to actually commute from where you're staying into campus? Is that going to be a free bus? Are you going to cycle? Is it going to actually cost you money? If you get a job, how much will it cost you to get to your place of work, and so on? Don't forget backwards and forwards at the end of term, or indeed more frequently if you've got close friends at home and are going to want to visit them. Most people of your generation would say a phone is essential spending. In my generation, they weren't, of course, invented, so perhaps I'd regard them as optional. But most people nowadays think a phone and keeping in contact with friends and indeed remaining safe when you're out on your own is essential spending. So decide about that, and again, we'll get some numbers in a minute, but really it's just a case of regarding thinking about the things you regard as absolutely essential. So have we got everything on our essential items? Well, obviously you haven't had any fun or done anything other than just the basics, but once you've used your income to provide for all of the basics, then you'll normally have something left, and that's either called disposable income or discretionary spend. In other words, spending that you can choose whether to do or not. Quite often people refer to discretionary spend as things you like, not things you need. So you might want to make a budget, you might want to work out how much a week you want to spend on socialising or cosmetics or whatever. But in your position, when you're on limited income, it's usually what's left after the essentials, and you've got to hope that actually there is something left after you've paid for the essentials. So discretionary spend might include going out to the cinema, might include a mobile phone, but you might have included that in essentials. Okay, so we're nearly ready to do our budget, and as I've already illustrated for you with some of my examples, it's quite hard to do at first because the first time you do a budget you are pretty likely to forget something, and indeed often more than one something. So each time you do a budget you'll get better at it, because what you'll have done is looked at what you missed, what did you forget, and that improves your budget the next time you do it. It also does make you think before you spend once you get into the habit of it, because what you might do is be about to spend some money on something and realise, oh dear, I haven't budgeted for this. Do I really want to spend this money, and am I going to be able to make savings elsewhere? So let's have a look at now putting together our personal budget. So we've looked at the elements of the personal budget, but now let's have a little bit of a think about how we might get some facts together. So if you're already at university, you're likely to know what your student loan is per term or per half year. That's quite a crucial difference, because if it's per term it's 3 lots, and if it's per half year it's only twice. So you need to establish how frequently that's going to be paid. When's it arrive? Does it arrive at the beginning of the term? Are you on a weekly pay packet? Maybe you've got some weekly income coming in. That makes it a bit easier to manage your money. Then looking at, as I've said, essential spend and discretionary spend. And what I'm going to do is start doing a budget for you. So this is my first term at university. Best to do a budget that is for a reasonably short period of time, because it allows you then to re-budget after looking at what went wrong. And quite often you'll budget for a period that's matched by your fixed income. So if your main income is for the term, then that's a good period to budget for. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to do. Put down your expected expenses. We've looked at basic living expenses. Rent you can find out if you've not gone to university yet and you're thinking about a budget in advance of going. You will probably know what you're likely to be spending on rent, but check out that heat and light. If you're actually moving into a flat and have looked at it, it's a good idea to ask the current tenants how much they're spending a month or quarter on heat and light. Food is a really tricky one. What you might do at home is monitor how much you spend on food, although that's a little bit sad, and most people take a wild guess and find out later it was way out and usually under. Don't forget your course expenses. You're there to learn, and socialising comes afterwards. So if you've got to pay to get into campus, some subjects you'll have to spend a lot of money on textbooks. Find out if mum and dad are willing to finance that bit, so you don't have to work it into a fixed budget. And other subjects like chemistry, you'll need lab coats and other equipment, and stationery. So you get down an idea and then start doing some doodling about on the web and find out how much things are. Now, when you're estimating expenditure, try and be as accurate as you can. Don't deliberately overestimate to be on the safe side. First of all, you'll find that you run out of money, and then you get disheartened before you've even started, but it also affects how you spend. If in the back of your mind you know that you've overestimated everything and therefore you've got sort of plenty of cushion in your budget, you're much more likely to overspend, and it's very difficult to monitor that, and the more times you overspend, the more likely you are to bust your budget. Try and do a weekly estimate for things like food and then multiply it up to a term, but think quite carefully about holidays, particularly for those in ordinary rented accommodation rather than university accommodation. What you'll find is that you've got to pay your rent for an entire year, whereas university accommodation probably you only have to pay term by term. That will give you some welcome time off over Christmas and Easter and of course the summer. So make sure you've got enough weeks in to cover what you're doing. Also, if you're thinking of staying down at university over the holidays to work or to socialise, then obviously you need to include extra expenditure in your budget to cover that. Okay, well, here's a little bit of a look now at trying to get some figures down. If you use spreadsheets, you'll find spreadsheets very, very helpful in doing this because they do actually allow sort of infinite combination of changes and so on. So what I've got down, I'll start with the income. That's a traditional way to actually see where you're going. So here I've got some income which has come from my parents. They promised me £1,200 a term. My student maintenance loan I know is going to be £800 a term, and I'm reckoning I'm going to get a part-time job. I've already got something in mind. I reckon I can earn £50 a week working on Saturdays and a bit of Sunday and a couple of evenings a week. So I don't think I'll have to pay any tax on that. No, you're correct, you're well below the limit. So total income for the term, £2,500. Okay, I've done a bit of a fact find, and I'm in University Hall of Residence, and my rent is £100 a week, so 10 weeks that multiplies up to £1,000. I've taken a wild guess at food at £35 a week. That sounds like loads. 10 weeks I'm going to be down. I'm going home after the first term and Mum can pay for the food, so £3.50. Mobile phone, my current contract is £25 a month. I've never beaten it, so let's allow 4 months. That'll take me through to January when my next student maintenance loan comes through, and then I reckon £500. That's going to get me all the textbooks I need and plenty for stationery, and I've estimated something for travel to campus. Although I'm in University Hall, it's a little way away, and I think I'll probably take the bus, so I'm estimating a few pounds a day. My total essential spend is £2,100, and that leaves me £400 for discretionary spend. Now, I suspect it depends on your tastes as to whether you think £40 a week is little or a lot, but let's have a look. Okay, so now a bit of a review of the figures. I'm living off campus. I'm living off campus because the rent is cheaper there. My fees are covered by my loan in respect of fees, so I'm not budgeting for fees at all. If I don't get the job, that's £500 a term coming in. Well, I've only got £400 left, so if I don't get the job, I won't even be able to pay for my essentials. £40 a week on my social life sounds like loads. Absolutely terrific. Okay, well, I'm ready to go. What you'll need to do then is try and keep a note of what you spend money on. It's much easier if you use a debit card to make payments, because the more cash you take out, the more difficult it is to track what you spent it on. I didn't like my job. I only stuck it for 6 weeks, and that meant my income was down. I forgot to budget for transport to work. I put transport into university, but works in the opposite direction, so I didn't put anything in the budget for that. And food cost a lot more than I thought it would. I can't be bothered to cook, and I tend to buy stuff out most of the time, and £35 a week doesn't go very far. I also needed a laptop, and I hadn't really put enough in my budget to cover that. And I got a bit carried away with socialising. Well, it was my first term away and it just seemed like a good idea, so let's have a look at how this actually panned out. Well, What I've done here on this slide is I've put down my budget and I put my actual next to it. So mum and dad came up trumps and so did my student loan, but my income from my job, I budgeted 500, but it was only 300. So I'm short on my income already. I forgot to budget for a TV licence, and I need a TV licence, and that's £145, so I won't forget that next year. Food, yes, well, a lot of bought sandwiches and a lot of bought food, and I'm going to have think again. Also, because I was away from home, I was using the phone quite a bit more. When I've been around home and I've just checked in with friends, it's been face-to-face, but a lot more use on my mobile phone. Laptop pushed me over budget on textbooks, and then my travel was a disaster. So all in all, the job was really not a good idea. £300 in and an extra £170 out, and oh dear, what a disaster. Instead of having £400 available for discretionary spend, I'm already in negative. Let's have a look at what I spent my money on when it was stuff I didn't need to. Well, my social spending in that term was £620, and that leaves me quite a lot short. I also spent £250 on clothes. I had the basics, but there are a few things I fancied. I got an overdraft, and that was up to the maximum of £1,000, and I also had to borrow from mum and dad. So I had £87 left by the end of term, but it cost me £60 to get home at the end of term, and so I'm absolutely skint. Well, holiday will sort itself out. Let's have a little bit of a think about budgeting for next term. First thing is I better cut back. I can't spend that much again, but I won't need to buy a laptop, and I won't need my TV license, so my expenditure is going to go down. Job was a disaster, and virtually I earned nothing out of that. What I've done though is found out I can do some bar work at the Student Union. It'll only be 3 nights a week, but I won't need to have any extra travelling costs, and in fact it'll probably be like socialising, only I'll be being paid for it. I'm also going to buy a second-hand bicycle so I don't have to pay to go into uni. Obviously some of the time the weather might be bad, but that might help. Moving a bit closer isn't really an option. I've signed up for a year, and anyway if I move nearer to campus it's going to be more expensive, so I doubt whether I'd save any money in the long term. As an aside, I'll just mention that that's actually pretty likely to be the issue. You will get places that are cheaper further away, but you may end up spending the extra money in travelling expenses, so you need to think about getting a balance. The mobile bills were more than I expected. Now I'm out of contract, so I need to shop around and look for deals and see whether I can get something that's actually not going to cost me quite as much money. So here comes my term 2 budget, and I feel quite enthusiastic about this now. I feel a bit more in control. So I've got the same incoming, and in fact I'm going to make £500 anyway doing bar work at the university. I've got my rent right, I haven't got a TV licence, and I'm also putting up my estimate for food, although I'm going to try and actually not spend so much money out and about. I've increased my mobile phone estimate, and I've purchased most of my textbooks. I've still got stationery left. Went a bit mad in Staples, so maybe I think 50 quid, that should be enough. I've also got to repay my Term 1 loan, so £250, I've got to pay that back by the end of this year. The overdraft will just have to stay where it is, but at least I can pay off mum and dad. Well, that leaves me with even more for discretionary spend than I had last term, so with a bit of luck I should make it through to Easter without any damage. Let's have a little bit of a review. As I said, mum and dad want the loan repaid by the end of the academic year. They lent me £500, so that's going to be £250 a term. Working at the university, as I said, will be a great social life and no spending, money coming in. I'll start thinking about how to make my money go a bit further. I'm going to stop buying sandwiches out anyway, and maybe not coffee either. Perhaps I'll ration myself to 2 or 3 cups a week rather than whenever it comes into my head. I'm also going to think carefully about my phone. I need to check out what offers there are, what deals there are. If I want clothes, I can go to thrift shops. Well, that'll save quite a bit of money. So, where are we? Well, we've done our budgeting exercise. We're now going to just review what we've done and where we are. Set as realistic a budget as you can. It's pretty likely you will miss things, but then keep a detailed record of what you spend. If you use a debit card, it makes it much easier. Then you can compare with the budget. Have a look at the end of term, however bad it was, see where you went wrong, and then use that to do your next budget. And then finally, one last thing, let me just throw you this extra complication into the mix. Quite often there'll be large bills that are due at a particular time. That might be a bill that lasts for a whole year, or it might be a bill for the whole term. Now, sometimes when you've got income coming in weekly and a large bill due, the two might come out at the same amount by the end of term, but you won't be able to pay the bill as it falls due. You have what's called a cash flow difficulty. You usually say that when you actually know it balances out at the end, but you haven't got enough cash to actually meet the bill as it arises. So on paper it works, and in reality it doesn't. Maybe you need to look at weekly instalments, and that's probably quite a good tip for you for things like electricity, gas and so on. If you can go onto a direct debit arrangement, you frequently get a cheaper rate, and it'll help you spread the cost of living. Well, that's our webinar on budgeting, and we hope you found it useful, and I think we're ready for a few questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Rebecca. Thanks very much for that. I'll now sort of open it up. If anyone's got any questions, you've got a sort of dialogue box in your on your screen for the ability to ask those. And we've had a few come through already. So the first one we've had come through is from Francesca. She's just asking, what can I do if all my money is gone on essentials?
Thanks for that question. If all your money is gone on essentials, you're a bit stuck really. You're not going to have a very good time, but let's try and give you a serious answer. Well, with budgeting and these types of questions, there's always two elements to it. Can you increase your income? Can you reduce your outgoings? So have a good look at what you've got coming in. Is there any opportunity to get some part-time work? Maybe if you're still at school, that could be babysitting, or maybe doing a bit of tutoring for younger students. If you're at university, it might be bar work, it might be waitressing, anything like that. And particularly at this time of year, of course, as we come up to Christmas, you may find that you can easily get some work helping out in pubs that are a lot busier and waitressing. So that sort of thing might be appropriate. Looking at the other side, how can you reduce your outgoings? If your essentials are covering everything, all of your income, then have a little bit of a look and see what is it you're budgeting for that's maybe your biggest cost will be rent, and there's not much you can do about that, but you might be able to cut down on some other expenses. One way of cutting your costs on food is to make sure you shop at the supermarket at the time they put the reductions out, and actually going into your local supermarket and having a little chat with a member of staff on dairy might actually do you some good. You can find out what time they normally do the reductions, so you can time getting there at the right time. Some of you may even work at a large supermarket, and therefore you'll be aware of when the reductions go in, so that's a good idea. Also on food, using a very small local shop might actually work out more expensive. You've got to balance the cost of getting there with the cost of the food. Okay, we've got any more questions?
Okay, excellent. Yeah, we've had one come through from Adam. He's asked, how do I find out how much things like rent, TV license, food are going to cost me? Where can I find out that information?
Well, if you're off to university for the first time, what you might think of doing is, first of all, on rent, well, when you apply for halls of residence, if that's what you decide to do, it'll usually tell you what the rent is, and look in the details and find out whether all your bills are included. If you're actually renting in the private sector, then your rent is probably going to be determined by how many of you are sharing a property. So you need to sort of do a bit of add, divide and take away to try and come up with something there. Your bills, good idea to ask somebody in that property or a very similar one. Bear in mind that properties with night storage heaters tend to be very, very expensive to heat, and actually, although the rent might be a little bit more, you would be much better off going to somewhere with gas central heating, because you'll save hand over fist on your heating costs. Food, well, you could always ask your parents how much they think that you need to budget for food, or do a week's menu, have a wander around Tesco's, or get the app on your iPad and have a look at the prices of things and just give you a bit of an idea. You only want to have a stab and then later on you'll improve. Hope that helps. Anything else?
Okay, and I think last one here, because we've not had many questions come through, and this is from Kelly. Where can I go if I get myself into trouble? So everything's gone wrong and I've overspent and I've not got anything available to me. Where can I go?
Right. One, two, three. Got any sound on that? Yes. Right. We've got intermittent headsets here. Right. Okay. I'm going back to you're in deep trouble. Okay, so you're in deep trouble. Let's have a little bit of think about where you can go. First of all, what you may find is that if you go in and talk to your bank, they're quite willing to extend your overdraft for a temporary period of time or help you out like that. Very tempting to rush out and get a credit card and stick some money on that. Very, very expensive way to borrow. We're going to do another webinar on borrowing and on the cost of borrowing, and this isn't really a good idea. You might have to ring mum and dad and eat humble pie, and they may be able to help you out. But if all else has failed, here are the sorts of places that can give you some advice about debt. You can go try the Student Union first. They've probably got a money advice centre. Try Citizens Advice Bureau. The government-funded money advice service is very good, MAS. Google that and find it. Or there is a debt line as well. Just be a little bit careful when you're actually looking for organisations that can help you out when you're in debt, because some of them do charge quite substantial amounts of money for their advice. So it's best to try and find something that's funded by the government, and the Citizens Advice Bureau can actually direct you at some that are free. So be careful before jumping in, and please don't take out a payday loan. Okay, I think we're wrapping up. Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening. Let me just hand back and we can finish off.
Okay, okay, thanks everyone for listening. As Rebecca mentioned, we want this to start a suite of webinars, so we'll send you out details of future sessions if you want to be involved with them in sometime in the new year. But thanks for listening. If there are any questions you couldn't get answered, we will follow up with those in an email, so not to worry. We'll also have a recording of this webinar posted up within a fortnight from now, and we'll send you details of that in an email. as well. So if you wanted to pass it on to friends or view it again, that you can do that. Thanks for tuning in, and see you again soon.